That is one tough rose. If it lived through all the hardships of the season, all the droughts and winters, neglect and competitions from tough weeds, if that rose lived to the old age, it is worth of rejuvenating. So today we are talking how to rejuvenate an old and gnarly rose. Olga Carmody with you today. Let's begin. What happens when rose becomes old? Well, it is easier to notice that this is an old rose in front of us in winter, when rose loses all its leaves, and then we see those old, gnarly, gray stems. And usually when stems become old, they have this transition from very green and fresh-looking stems into much thicker stems, which thicker bark. And usually in old age, there are several things happening to the old canes. They're becoming more susceptible to diseases, so they lose as disease resistance. They are producing less basal canes and less blooms. And of course, we gardeners, blooms. That's what we are after in roses. And then they're becoming thick and they can sit on that bush for decades. And very often the gardener thinks, okay, maybe next year something different will happen, and those old canes will start growing and produce blooms, and rose will rejuvenate. Well, as I tell my kids, when you do the same thing, expect the same results. So something has to be done to those old canes for them to change their behavior. Here comes the next step, rejuvenation. And why do we want to do rejuvenation on all shrubs? Well, we have to remember that rejuvenation, and under rejuvenation I mean the cutting of the stems. Some people think it's too drastic and they're afraid to do it, and I must admit that among all the rose care, this can be the most horrifying thing you can do to your rose. But you keep in mind that if rose is so old and it grew in such an old stage despite all the neglect and bad environment conditions, that rose probably will respond well to rejuvenation and it's not going to die. So why to rejuvenate? Because rejuvenation, the cutting of the stems, creates new growth, and that's what we want. We want to push rose into the creation of basal stems. And that's why very often when we have a shrub, and that shrub on one side is dying back, and the gardener thinks that the great results would be achieved if I trim the well overgrown side and then leave the dying back side as it is, and then my shrub will be symmetrical and it will stay that way. Well, no, with shrubs, to have that symmetrical shape, usually the advice is to slightly trim the side which is struggling in shape and very lightly treat the side which is overgrown. This way, the trimmed side will be encouraged to produce new growth. So we figured it out. Rejuvenation is good because it pushes the plant to create new growth. And new growth is automatically, in roses, is more blooms, less diseases, less unsightly, gnarly stems, which again can sit there for years. Before the gardener tries to rejuvenate the rose, my suggestion would be to consider the other reason why rose might be going into this old age without producing blooms. Maybe, and you know what, we all make mistakes. So maybe there is this little chance, just a tiny one, that the beginner gardener can be trimming the new, fresh basal shoots coming out of the rose, the base of the rose, thinking that those are weeds or root suckers or I don't know what, just trimming them off and leaving old stems. In that case, you will deprive your rose from all this fresh new growth. Another reason why rose wouldn't be performing, of course, a lack of sun, a lack of water, a lack of mulching, a lack of feeding the soil. Again, we know that roses are heavy feeders and they do need our attention to perform well and to bloom well. And of course, we are after blooms. There are plenty of videos on YouTube which are showing you how to do the rejuvenating pruning so I won't be able to show you one because I don't have really overgrown rose on my property. But there are several points here. Sometimes rose has only one very old stem going high. Very often it happens in the climbing rose. And then you don't have any basal shoots because that stem is so old it refuses to create basal shoots. It creates all the shoots higher, somewhere, let's say human height. What to do in that situation? Well, I would advise to trim that long gnarly stem to the first really nice and healthy green shoot and cut it there. This way, a rose will have that green stem to create leaves there, to collect the sun energy, and to be able to push new growth, hopefully further down all the way near the bottom of the rose. But if you have several basal shoots, then you can start trimming those old stems. And usually you can trim one stem if you have up to 4 stems altogether. So 1 old and 3 young, you can take that old stem out. If you have more than 4 stems altogether in the rose, you can try and go for 2 old stems. But usually when you have 1 young and 1 old, you can trim the old one and leave the young stem, young basal stem growing. Roses do have this wonderful feature. They do have a lot of hidden buds. And very often we don't see them with our naked eye, especially near the base of the rose. And if we trim those old stems all the way down to the base, that's usually recommended if you're trimming the old stem out as close to the base as you can, since those stumps will prevent a rose to form new basal shoots. So keep that in mind. And since we don't see the new buds, we can just trim it all the way to the base, and rose would be very willing to create young stems out of nowhere. Basically, you're looking at this smooth bark, and in a week, there is a new shoot being created there from a hidden bud. So that's a wonderful feature of roses. They have a lot of hidden buds, and if they create basal shoots, they do it in abundance from very unusual and unexpected spaces. When you finish with rejuvenation, very important is not to sit back and relax and think that the rose will do the job. Very important is to care for your rose. And by care, I mean you have to stay on top of watering. Roses do allow deep soaks, not very often frequent small watering sessions, but deep ones. Water penetrates the soil all the way deep down. And then light feeding. Light feeding, I do like natural organic fertilizers. You help your rose to grow, and then in several months, when you see new growth beginning, you can do light fertilization again. This is not the time to stress the plant. And the plant is stressed when it has drought conditions, when it doesn't have sun, which it requires, when there is no food in the soil for the roots to eat. So we don't want to stress the freshly rejuvenated plant. We need to give it help. And when we do everything what we need to do with old rejuvenated shrub, we should expect wonderful results in several months. Rose will start to create these very often very burgundy, dark, fresh stems coming from the base of the plant. And those stems are the future of the rose. They will be carrying rose into the future blooms for you. So that's a process and the deeper knowledge of how to rejuvenate a rose. And of course, rejuvenation on roses goes year after year. We take old stems, rose create new stems, and that's how the life of the rose progresses. So, my dear gardeners, thank you for giving me this suggestion about how to rejuvenate a rose. Happy gardening, and I will see you next time, next video.